Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here with you all today. I'm just sorry we have to do this online. And I really appreciate the committee jumping right in there. It's a tough time to have to make all of these adjustments. So I hope what I have to say today is still relevant in our changing times. I'm going to be talking a little bit more from the perspective of grassroots work rather than from international development and international organizations. So I hope that I hope there's something in here for everyone out there in these 20-some countries. I'm particularly excited to be here because I just returned last week from the US in an international program where I was specifically focused on the theme I'm going to be talking about today, and that's how do we engage people to inspire them to actually become active members of civil society, or even just their local communities. And what I'd like to do today is I'm going to go back and forth between my slides and me here, because I think it's not going to be so exciting to see me the whole time. What I'd also like to do is share my slides. So if you just give me a quick moment, I'm going to get that up and running. And just here we are. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my work. Going to start with a little bit, but not by introducing myself so much, but through case studies. I'd like to share some different examples of projects and talk about the impacts they've had on different types of people, as well as some of the challenges they've faced. I'd like to also share some of my own reflections and some of my own learnings from the work I've done. And I hope by doing this, everybody will get something useful from that. So first, let me start a little bit with, you know, just how I feel about my work. I really feel like I'm the most lucky person in the world. I'm the luckiest person in the world to have to be able to have the opportunity to meet people every day from different backgrounds who really have a desire to make the world a better place, whether it's at the really grassroots level in their own communities or somewhere else. I meet people from NGOs, from different community groups, people from the corporate sector who want to see how their companies can do better. And it's great to meet young people who are just questioning things. So I really see myself and my role as lighting a fire under people or helping them do better. And in the civil society sector, where I work, there's a lot of discussion about how do we involve people? How do we get them to take initiative? And also, how do we get them to change behaviors, right? You know, whether it's about in the area of health or conflict mediation or gender equality or enhancing quality of life, you know, so to improve these, to make these problems better, you know, people need more than just information or knowledge. Often they need to change their perspectives. Often they need a different worldview. And this also requires reflection and active change in how we see the world and feedback, and sometimes failure, which can be very painful. But this is where I also think inspiring people and motivating people is crucial. So I'd like to talk a little bit, before I go into my examples, I just want to say that I think engagement and direct experience is also very important, even though it isn't easy and it can be very painful. I've often felt myself that direct engagement helps us realize also what we don't know. And that can be a very big learning. And sometimes just experience is no better teacher. And I also believe that each individual's role is integral. Although alone, our influence is quite limited. But by working together, and I'm very hopeful about the future. I'm not necessarily could be considered an optimist, but I'm very hopeful that things can be better if we pool our resources and pool our talents, that we can make our communities or societies better. Now, what I'm going to talk about today, since I'm not an academic, is not going to be based on hard data or hard, serious research with numbers, but I would like to share some information that's come out of project evaluations, pre and post program surveys and interviews, and hopefully there will be something useful in here for everyone. As I explained, I just returned to the US last week, and it was for this program, Building the Tomodachi Generation. This is a program aimed at developing not only networks between US and Japanese students, but also developing their skills and knowledge around civil society and the important role that the different sectors have to play in tackling social issues. Excuse me, I have a little bit of allergies today. And the students are selected in both countries, competitive process by the Washington Institute, which is our implementing partner. We also work with the US-Japan Foundation and Morgan Stanley. So besides my daily lessons, which the US students get for 3 weeks online, so I've been doing this online for 4 years, getting better little by little. The Japanese students have day-to-day lectures. We have guest speakers coming from government, from nonprofits, from the for-profit sector, talking about how they see their role in dealing with poverty, dealing with education. And then we also have the opportunities to have visits to places like the Capitol, to nonprofit, public radio in the US, the World Bank. But the most challenging and exciting part of the program is really the fact that the students have to, in 2 weeks, come up with a civil society initiative to tackle a specific issue in a specific place in Japan. Now, this schedule is packed, and they live together for 2 weeks. But we do try to incorporate some review and reflection every day into the program. So it starts quite intense with a lot of input. And then they go into this production phase of trying to come up with a solution. And as busy as it is, and as different as the students are, and as challenging as that middle part is, when students have problems getting along, by the last few days, in almost every case, students are committed to winning the competition and coming out as, even though there is actually no prize, but being selected as the best project in the group. And the project, these specific issues vary every year, and we've completely opened it up. So actually at the beginning of this year, a number of students had interest in gender issues. What I found was interesting is how they decided to actually cut the issue. Now, starting with gender issues, there's many opportunities, right? But we said a specific issue, specific place. One group decided to specifically focus on gender inequality in the home, so the division of labor inside the home, and actually how to put pressure on companies to make that reality. So getting, so not just paternity leave, but good time, good working time, say working until 5 or 6. Another group took a completely different stance on the topic. They decided to focus on sex education because they felt that parents and teachers' hesitancy to deal with the issues or talk about sex with kids, and specifically from a young age, brought about bigger disparities in the future. This was a huge learning for everyone. The third group went on a completely different topic, but they won, so I'll bring that up. They decided to focus on school refusing youth. Now, Soko are usually talked about as victims or weak people in Japanese society. However, they took it from a completely different standpoint, maybe because it's more recent in their memories. They looked at the anxiety kids face going into junior high school. Said, how can we mitigate that anxiety? And they tried to come up with a program involving teachers, students, and parents so that there would be less dropouts. Now, what we found from the surveys over the last 4 years that I've been involved in the program, although this was the 7th year, was the number one thing Japanese students clearly get is a sense of self-confidence, and it builds their, of course, English communication skills. US students also develop their communication skills, but they don't think about it as clearly. Both Japanese and American students do see other skills arise as well. And I just want to make, oops, sorry about that. Let me just bring that back. I have big gestures, apologies. Japanese and American students also tend to gain a better sense of their strengths, as well as understanding the biases they bring into working together. Changing their views of others, in particular the US students, gain a new understanding of an interest in other cultures, not just Japan. And Japanese students come to see diversity as a strength rather than as an impediment. We often hear, why can't everybody just agree? Over time, they start seeing, well, diversity brings new ideas, there's benefits. And both US and Japanese in the different cohorts over the years started understanding the importance of understanding really who the people are who are being impacted by problems. By understanding who they are, we can understand their own needs, and that would actually help us understand how we find solutions. And overall, the skills they develop are quite similar. Analytical skills, how to solve problems, why it's important to involve different actors, government, nonprofits, as well as the business sector. And of course, fortunately, which I guess this means we've been somewhat successful, is building their presentations and teamwork skills. Just very simply, this program is an offshoot of the Tomodachi initiative, which was started by US government multinationals to deal with the 3/11 multiple disasters. And how I got involved with this was I served for close to 4 years as the Japan representative for the Give to Asia Foundation, in charge of their Tohoku Recovery Fund. I'm not going to really talk about that except to say that one of our key things that we focused on was capacity development. And we funded one of the 3 key evaluations of Tohoku response, one being done here, the one that's in yellow, the Japan NGO Center for International Cooperation, or JANIC. And based on the outputs of this and Japan Platform, which is a network of organizations specifically focused on humanitarian affairs, I was hired by Japan Platform to coordinate a response training program. And this was a collaborative project between Tomodachi, Mercy Corps, Japan Platform, again with generous support from international donors. And we looked at what the needs were and put together an intensive program specifically focused on 8 skills and knowledge areas, and had 8 different specialists from the field. And this actually culminated in a final day, a bit chaotic, but a disaster simulation. An important part of this was it wasn't just Japanese humanitarian aid professionals. We wanted to develop the skills and knowledge in humanitarian response from people, for people not just Japan, but also China, Taiwan, and South Korea. So not only to prepare for future crises, but also to build a network of professionals in the Northeast Asia region for future sharing. They were living together in a rural area, and every morning they had to present learnings from the previous day. Every evening I had them reflect on the day before, and we followed up with reports. So we started with knowledge development, skills development, and key areas that we found based on past evaluation, and put this together in a final simulation. We had a lot of interesting talk about the gaps between organizations, whether they be small, large, multinational, community-based, and they learned a lot from that sharing. This was a bit chaotic I said this already, chaotic. However, it was a great learning for them to operate with limited information with people they've never met, and it was quite exciting. From their own reporting, we found that they learned about new approaches, they learned knowledge and skills, but they also learned the importance of needs assessment and why it's important to work directly with beneficiaries before assuming what needs are. And a lot of particularly the Japanese organizations told us putting things in a more systematic, organized approach was very meaningful. Positive learnings at the personal level were really about feeling more motivated, feeling, this uplifted word came up several times. I guess because organizations sometimes feel like they're all alone and they're in disaster zones or in difficult situations. And so developing the sense of solidarity was really important for them. Now the outcomes and the post-program use, we had many reported using this for training their own staff or training their own volunteers or including elements of our training in their future disaster response or their future implementation plans. So generally we felt quite happy about that. I would like to just stop a minute to talk about my own reflection about this. I realized, although I know how to coordinate programs, and I've been working with international groups for a long time, and I had experience working with about 50, 60 different projects in the Tohoku disaster in Japan, that my lack of experience in working in conflict zones, particularly in least developed countries, was a big hindrance to me making this as effective as I could have. And honestly, I didn't have any sense of accomplishment until the Nepal earthquake, when I got a sudden pop-up message on Skype from a Japanese NGO worker who contacted me with a quick thank you message because she was actually able to use the knowledge, the skills, and the network developed through our training. So I learned another thing, that it was really important for me personally to be having a continued connection with people after the programs so that I could actually see what was useful and what wasn't. And after that, I really decided it was important for me to improve my skills. So I've actually done a few online courses, one in humanitarian response and another one in innovative problem solving for social issues involving different sectors. And there's a lot of free courses out there. I would encourage you all to try to take some of those. And also something I learned from both the Tomodachi program and this program was to be really open to younger participants' ideas. I can be really strong-headed and sometimes I forget how old I am or that my experience gives me particular biases. But by being more open and modeling enthusiasm for social problem solving in a much more objective way, hopefully I can enthuse other people about doing the same and encourage them to be more open as well. I'd like to move on to another example that I've been quite excited about over the years. Very similar to the humanitarian aid program system, but quite different in terms of focus. Through JICA and the Japan Society, for the Rehabilitation of Persons with Disabilities, I've been involved for about 15 years in a number of different training programs, most of them focused on leadership development for persons with disabilities, or work opportunity programs for persons with disabilities. And basically I've been one of the facilitators in programs that last anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks. They've changed over the years. And the participants are people from either NGOs or government. Most of them are persons with disabilities, but not all of them. They come from the Middle East, they come from Latin America, they come from throughout Asia and Africa. And again, there's a lot of different types of workshops, lectures, visits. They have mentors, and they live and study together during this whole time in the JICA dormitory. They do have some opportunities for hands-on experience going into centers or independent living centers or places where PWDs, persons with disabilities, work. And they do have some hands-on experience, say, checking the accessibility of subway stations or checking how barrier-free a concert hall is. So it is quite an exciting time for a lot of them. And depending on the type of program, they may have daily journaling or daily reflection sessions, but they all are required, no matter what program it is, to submit a final report and or follow-up discussion. And presentations are often part of the program as well. So it goes through an interesting cycle similar to the humanitarian program, a lot of input of knowledge, trainings, but also engaging by going out and seeing places. There is a time, there is a phase, often in the middle of the program, where they start doubting if any of this is useful. And part of that is because, well, Japan is a rich country. Our country's not like this. You know, what do I get from this? So they do struggle sometimes to find some commonality. However, by the end of the program, they start to develop some sense of solidarity and some sense of being a community. And part of this is just from meeting the activists in Japan, seeing how long they've had to struggle, seeing that it isn't just because Japan is a rich country that things are more accessible. And also by finding the difficulties persons with disabilities still face in Japan. So a lot of the big change or most impressive things they talk about is the meeting of people who've been involved in the struggle for years. But also finding the commonality amongst their cohort, that people in Myanmar and Uganda may face similar struggles. Some of the most common personal and professional impacts are very similar to the humanitarian response program. New approaches, new skills, but another one we put a big emphasis on is resource assessment. What resources do you have in your community that are either untapped or underutilized, such as allies, potential space to use, working with local NGOs that might not be working with persons with disabilities yet, but also this building a sense of motivation or solidarity and being aware of what you can do, rather than focusing on the negative about what is not possible. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of details about concrete outcomes. I only have a few examples here from people who've taken part in my programs. And these are people who've actually, when they've gone back, they've put their final project plan into effect. This is one example from Cambodia. And he decided it wasn't going to be just for persons with disabilities. They were also including people who are poor community people, so persons with and without disabilities, to do crafts training, to produce quality goods, not charity goods that tourists buy because they feel bad, but quality goods, everyday items using local resources, locally made batiks, locally made items, local bamboo, whatever the resources they defined were. And this one has been quite successful. Sorry, I'm only choosing successful ones today. And this is another one that this woman, Cassie, completely amazed me. So she's visually impaired, and she wanted to create barrier-free tourism in Kazakhstan. She started first with the visually impaired populations, because that's what she is, and then expanded later. And an interesting part of their first year program was actually to create a photo exhibit made by persons with visual impairments. And she got this idea by meeting different PWD artists here in Japan. Before I talk too much about other programs, I want to say that this excites me every year. Meeting these people from all over the world with limited resources and trying to ignite some hope or expectation of what they can do, and helping them find what they do have, really motivates me to find new ways and new things I can do to help them be better at what they do. And one thing I love to do is role plays. And one thing that's worked throughout the years is having people role play situations by having a different disability. So for example, the blind person has to take on the situation as if they were in a wheelchair. Person in a wheelchair takes on the position of being deaf. The person who's deaf has tried to experience what it's like to be blind. And this really helps develop a sense of not only commonality and solidarity, but it also helps develop an understanding of how inclusion is not a competition. And from inclusion, everyone benefits. So it's really motivating for me to see what they can do when they go back as well, and how important it is for me to stay in touch with what they're doing. The last example I'd like to share today is from some of my work that I've done with the East Asian Institute, which is in rural Japan, about an hour to 2 hours north of Tokyo. And they have a 9-month training that's focused on rural leaders from different countries. And over 47 years, they've brought 57 people from 57 countries, and it's close to 1,400 now if the people all arrive this week from their respective countries. And the program is really focused on developing sustainable agriculture, communities, and servant leadership skills. So FOODLIFE is the word that's been developed at the Asian Rural Institute that embodies this idea of how food and life are integrally connected, that we can't separate them. And this means, and they're looking at the whole cycle of food, from production to harvesting, to food preparation, to cleaning up dishes, to making compost from leftovers. And everybody is involved in all of these elements. And also community building. At any one time on the campus, there's probably about 50 people from at least 20 different nations active in the community. And it's really this daily experience across cultures, ethnicities, and faiths, which is very important in this context, which allow people to grow together and start to understand differences, respect each other, and find common ground. Excuse me. And the last core value is servant leadership. Now at ARI, as I said, everybody's involved in every aspect of the campus, and this isn't just food and in the fields or managing the kitchen, but also in dormitory and taking care of the facilities. And participants have the opportunity to lead different teams, whether it be in the field or community events. And this power sharing is very influential. And for a lot of them, seeing the head of the school or the head of the programs do things such as clean dishes or drive them around, or the number one brought up example is clean the toilet, has a huge and long-lasting impact, especially if they're men. So I'm not going to talk much about this, but this information that I'm sharing actually comes from a much more in-depth assessment and study. I was involved in the training assessment where we looked at the contents, and then professional researchers actually did an impact study where they went out and visited people in their communities. So they get all these different types of stimuli, again, workshops, being involved in daily life, visits to different farms, visits to different parts of Japan, meeting homeless people. But it's really this working, studying, living together aspect through good times and bad, which has a huge impact on them. And built into the program is active reflection through journals, through advisors or mentors and counselors that come up from time to time, as well as reflection papers that are sent to their sending body or the organization that sends them, and then final reports and presentations. And then when they go back to their countries, often there's a graduate association waiting to hear from them. So over time, we have found that whether it's 1979 or 1989 or 2013, although participants went through their own stages of learning, that pretty much they had a 3-phase process. Not quite linear, more in it ebbs and flows, or it's sometimes more like a spiral, that there's 3 key phases. At the beginning, everyone's excited. They're here in Japan and the cherry blossoms are blooming. There's all these new people. They're very excited. Everything is new. It's when rainy season comes and it starts getting really hot that they start having difficulty getting along. Maybe they have conflicts, or whether it's because of communication or different styles of working or attitudes about time. Some of them start doubting, was this really a good idea? But it's really is augmented by the fact that it's 39 degrees outside. There's no siesta in Japan and we've got to do farm work. But by the time late September comes and they've started traveling a bit in Japan and met people from more people from organizations, they start reflecting on what can I bring home with me? And that helps them start thinking, what did I really get? What can I really use? And they start developing more of a sense of family. And there's a big fall harvest festival, and it's really evident there as they promote their own music, their own food, their own dance. And in the end, quite frankly, everybody cries and is sad to go. Through surveys, interviews, and just hanging out and talking to people at different events, we found changes in their view of themselves, changes in their view of others, as well as changes in the way they view their environment. So first, about their change in their view of selves and others, like the other programs, confidence, a reinforced belief or motivation about the importance of the work they do. But a big one particular to ARI is their change in their view of a leader. And this is the whole focus on a servant leader, where power is shared, and seeing the importance of being a facilitator, not a commander, not a general, not an authoritarian leader, and seeing the value of this. We particularly see this with young people. Of the 200 people I was specifically involved in interviewing or surveying, only 3 people said servant leadership was not useful. They were all older men, and I won't say anything else about that right now. View of the community, they started seeing the value of difference and the importance of different ideas, and how the people in the community can actually be a resource if we include them more instead of tell them what to do. And again, diversity is a strength, as I've said, seeing that there's a value in different inputs and different ideas, and that's where innovation might come from. And also learning how to connect issues, not only from people who are from different countries, how poverty and hunger and climate change and global warming and how all of things are connected, but how important it is to have that information and have skills to be able to tackle those problems. Looking at this changed perspective about environment, first in terms of the social environment, a number of graduates told us they changed the way their organizations work because they see their community members as valuable resources, as potential future leaders, by having them involved in decision making, by devolving some of the power, by actually developing future leaders. And then by learning about key issues at ARI, about GMOs, about climate change, about water and hygiene, and even farm management, that they started thinking about the natural environment a little bit different. How can we live in harmony with nature? How can we at least not destroy the natural environment around us? Because this will in turn have an impact on us, ourselves, and our health. And just a few examples looking at how they improve their work in communities by working with the marginalized. we found a number of graduates, some of them before were working with marginalized populations, but they started thinking about how do we include more marginalized populations around us in the community as allies, to harness their influence as a group, to create a community solidarity. And whether they be people from lower castes or orphans or migrant workers, how can we promote food self-sufficiency for better health or for income generation opportunities, or just as a way to get people more involved, working on farms together, to get people more actively communicating together, and to develop future potential leaders. Before I talk about difficulties, I'd like to just say a few things about my own learning, because there's no way I could ever replicate the learning I got by being involved in this. First, number one, as a person from a city, as a New York, Tokyo person, I learned a lot about rural life, and that was quite challenging for me. Another part is, as a pretty devout atheist, I had to suss out if I was the appropriate person, because many of these people are religious leaders in their communities. Many of them are Christians, but even in this picture here, there are people who are Buddhist or Muslim. And professionally, like the Humanitarian Response Program, this is a steep learning curve for me. I took again another birth by fire chance and said, okay, I'm going to do this huge assessment with only having experience on doing assessments or monitoring on small projects I was involved in or people I knew were involved in, and here in Japan, not in the poorest of the poor situations, not in conflict areas. So I was able to build a solid team, people with experience, graduate students, and by working with staff, donors, advisors, graduates in the field, and participants here in Japan at the time, we were able to come up with, I think, some useful outcomes to help transform and update the training program. But I must say, it was quite tough in the beginning. I am not so risk adverse. But I say for me, the biggest thing is I was so inspired by meeting these people. People who have limited means, and they're all over the world, but trying to make communities better. And, you know, that's what really inspires me to do my work. I have been really positive so far. And before everybody starts yelling at me about all the challenges and all the difficulties people face, I will say, yes, indeed, change is not easy. And participants of every program, from the students, from the Asian Rural Institute, they all faced big challenges because it's not easy. Whenever they return back to their communities, to their homes, there's always some pressure on them to do something different and not to bring about change. Whether they're students, pressure for what companies they should work in, whether humanitarian response workers or persons with disabilities, they have all the expectations of their organization about what they should be doing. Or in the case of people from the Asian Rural Institute, some of them go back to places of instability and conflict, and they actually can't go back to there is no organization for them to go back to. People have been evacuated. So there are all types of difficulties people face. And even from the impact study we did at Asian Rural Institute, we found that only 1/4 of the graduates were able to implement their plans. And another 1/4 felt they were able to implement something. So it's really a good half that were not able to do what they intended, but they still found that they got something valuable. So after the humanitarian training and the Asian Rural Institute training, and after I wrote all those reports and got all the materials to the donors, I decided to step back and think a bit more about what I wanted to do for the future. And I looked at my goals, and the first thing I did was produce a stage play, but I'm not going to be talking about that today. I decided I needed to know what I could do to develop others to become more engaged. What could I do to support people to become future change agents? That was the question I started looking at. What were the challenges faced? So about 3 years ago, I started studying conflict mediation through the New York Peace Institute and Hitotsubashi University here in Tokyo. And we now have a small core group based in Tokyo, people from different countries. And we're focused really on these core values of looking at interpersonal conflict. How do we get people to hear each other? How do we get people to understand that the other person is a human being beyond this conflict? How do we empower people to find their own sustainable solutions? And often we found in our practice and in the programs that we're just starting is that it starts with better communication skills and developing a sense of empathy. So our group right now is small. We're based on really basic skills and how do we get people to change their habits. But we're looking to expand this more this year, maybe with a little bit of online work, but we're really looking at community-based, individual-based conflict. And then also with all this experience I've had over the years as a trainer, as a program development person, I decided a few years ago, I want to teach more young people. I'm not giving up teaching adults. The picture at the top is from one of my senior citizens programs last year, which was quite challenging, not just because it was in Japanese, but also because sense of the world is quite different also from the NGO people I'm used to working with. But I really wanted to work with young people. And the picture below on the bottom part of the slide is from my university students at Sophia University, where I teach about NGOs and cross-cultural conflict and cross-cultural context, excuse me. And at the end of the year, I make them come up with a pledge of action steps they're going to take. And the main reason I want to work with university students is I just got so tired of people my age and now younger telling me it can't be done, you can't change anything, you can't do that in Japan. And then another one was I thought, well, maybe it's about inspiring young people. There's a lot of young people who are interested in climate change, or they don't like things, but they don't know what to do. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the skills yet. And then the other one was really just really personal satisfaction purposes. I get very motivated and excited when somebody tells me they're going to change their future trajectory. For example, the student who is now an intern at the UN in New York, who was actually an MBA student, completely different from what he had planned on doing. The student who was interning in Myanmar and Burma recently, and another one now who is working with indigenous people in Mexico, quite to his father's dismay. He is not a PhD in colonial Spanish history. He's now working with indigenous people. So, I mean, these are just examples. They're just one person in a class, but I feel like if I can light that fire, become a catalyst for one person, I'm really excited. Another thing, it's not just students, but it's still working in the area of civil society, because I feel that we always need to develop more community engagement, not just here in Japan, but that's where I am, that's where I live, that's where I've been working. I started a new training program last year, initially for one organization, and from this March, because we're online, we've expanded it. The focus is, how do we expand our impact by helping people develop their own skills so that they can go back to their organizations, go back to their communities, or get involved in other organizations' work and actually inspire others to get more involved. So this is engaging with people already inside organizations, but people who just want to get involved. And basically this all comes down to this idea that I learn so much from every single person I work with. And I try to take something from the challenges we face and think about how can I develop others? And how can I engage them? Because I know that experiencing something has such a deep impact. And any of us with knowledge or skills, I feel, has a responsibility to do that. I know it's kind of a buzzword that diversity promotes innovation. However, it is important to have people at the table who disagree with you, especially in this time of nationalism and how people are so polarized. It's really difficult to have those difficult conversations with people who completely disagree with you. There's a lot of pain, but there's also a lot of growth that can come from that. Making each other human, making each other see each other beyond this political agreement. But my biggest struggle is being flexible. I'm very strong-minded. I have very strong opinions about things, but being able to step back, be more open to different ideas. I've also learned a lot by trying to do that. And I know another buzzword is, oh, there's always opportunity in crisis. And here we are again, yes, in another crisis. And there's always be another crisis. But crisis gives us the opportunity to look at, you know, neglected issues and our connections to people, to look at problems differently. So I guess maybe that's because for me, when I come down to it, I must be true to my core values. I haven't talked about any of the nightmare projects I've done. I don't want to bring anybody down. But for me as an activist and as an artist, I think that I see everybody as important in this. And before my last minute is up, my last ask for everyone is the same of what I ask for anyone in any workshop I have. I'd like everyone to reflect on this conference at the end of the week. Look at, what did you get from this? Did you get some new ideas? Somebody who inspired you about doing something? Look at that. And not my talk, I'm not talking about that, but reflect on what you got and see how you can contribute, and publicly name some action step you'll take. I'm not asking you to post a piece of paper like I do with my workshop participants all the time. But, you know, in these anxious times, I think if we can look around at what our communities need and see how we can develop others to do more good, you know, I think that we each can be an inspiration, even if it's just to one other person. You know, I really believe every single person's effort matters. Every bit of blood, sweat, tears, it all matters. And each part of the process is important. So, you know, there's people out there, they don't know they're the future leaders. They don't know yet what they have to contribute. Maybe they need some information. Maybe they need some knowledge or skills you have. Or maybe they just need to be a bit more engaged so that, you know, they can be inspired to be the future leaders. So I just want to thank you all. Thank you very much. And my time is up. Thank you.